Hello and welcome to Quiz Time. I'm your host, Ellen, and today we have 100 questions on general knowledge. We'd love to know how you did, so please tell us in the comments. So let's begin. Which mathematical concept formulated in the 1940s provides the theoretical foundation for modern computing? Boolean algebra, lambda calculus, or vector calculus? Lambda calculus. What 1970s design movement was characterized by industrial aesthetics with exposed structural elements? Memphis design, high-tech architecture, or postmodernism? High-tech architecture. Which ancient civilization developed the concept of the siphon for moving liquids? Mesopotamians, Egyptians, or Phoenicians? The Egyptians. In information theory, what is the name for the minimum amount of energy required to erase one bit of information? Planck constant, Landauer limit, or Shannon threshold? Landauer limit. Which early electronic musical instrument used radio frequency oscillations controlled by hand movements in the air? Telharmonium, theremin, or ondus martinus? Theremin. The development of which technology was significantly accelerated by the space race of the 1960s? Microprocessors, liquid crystal displays, or laser printers? Microprocessors. What cognitive bias describes the tendency to believe that one's choices and judgments are correct based on the outcomes? Outcome bias, framing effect, or gambler's fallacy? Outcome bias. Which ancient civilization created the world's first known seismoscope to detect earthquakes? Ancient Rome, ancient China, or ancient Greece? Ancient China. What is the term for the maximum theoretical data transfer rate of a communication channel? Shannon capacity, bandwidth allocation, or transfer quotient? Shannon capacity. Which architectural movement emerged in Britain during the 50s and was characterized by rough, unfinished concrete facades? Brutalism, deconstructivism, or metabolism? Brutalism. What is the name for the Japanese art form of repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer? Ikebana, kintsugi, or sashiko? Kintsugi. Which number system used in ancient Mesopotamia had a base of 60 rather than 10? Duodecimal, sexagesimal, or vigesimal? Sexagesimal. In typography, what term describes the small horizontal stroke at the base of certain letter forms? Terminal, baseline, or beard? Beard. Which early computer algorithm was specifically designed to find the shortest path between nodes in a graph? Bellman-Ford algorithm, bubble sort, or Huffman coding? Bellman-Ford algorithm. The Bader-Meinhof phenomena refers to which cognitive effect? Frequency illusion, choice supportive bias, or conservatism bias? Frequency illusion. Which economic principle describes when the value of a network increases proportionally with the square of the number of users? Network effect, Metcalfe's law, or Pareto principle? Metcalfe's law. What art movement of the early 20th century rejected decorative elements in favor of pure function? The Style, constructivism, or futurism? Constructivism. The wicked problem concept in social planning refers to problems that are impossible to solve, difficult to define and inherently complex, or caused by malicious intent. Difficult to define and inherently complex. Which early operating system introduced the concept of virtual memory? Atlas Supervisor, CP/M, or MS-DOS? Atlas Supervisor. In neuropsychology, what is the term for the ability to recognize familiar faces? Prosopagnosia, facial pareidolia, or prosopagnosis? Prosopagnosis. Which fashion movement of the 80s drew inspiration from historical military uniforms? New Romanticism, Memphis Design, or Cyberpunk? New Romanticism. What is the term for the process of converting raw binary data into a text format for transmission? Encryption, base64 encoding, or hashing? Base64 encoding. Which cognitive bias describes the tendency to search for and interpret information that confirms one's prior beliefs? Selection bias, anchoring bias, or confirmation bias? Confirmation bias. What is the name of the early internet protocol that allowed remote login to other computers? Telnet, IMAP, or POP3? Telnet. Which anthropological theory suggests that cultures evolve in a manner similar to biological evolution? Cultural relativism, cultural evolutionism, or materialism? Cultural evolutionism. In typographic design, what is the term for the overall pattern created by the spaces between words in a body of text? River, gutter, or alley? River. What is the name of the phenomena where electrical conductivity drops to zero at very low temperatures? Piezoelectricity, superconductivity, or photoelectricity? Superconductivity. Which psychological effect describes how individuals in a group tend to exert less effort than when working alone? Bystander effect, social loafing, or groupthink? Social loafing. What pioneering computer networking technology was first demonstrated at the Xerox PARC Research Center in the 70s? token ring, Ethernet, or FDDI? Ethernet. In urban planning, what is a term for the process of revitalizing deteriorated urban areas with an influx of more affluent residents? Urban renewal, gentrification, or metropolitan consolidation? Gentrification. Which psychological phenomenon describes the discomfort experienced when holding contradictory beliefs? Cognitive dissonance, counter-attitudinal advocacy, or reactance theory? Cognitive dissonance. What mathematical field studies objects that remain invariant under certain transformations? Topology, number theory, or differential equations? Topology. Which early electronic messaging system developed in the 80s was a precursor to modern chat applications? Internet relay chat, bulletin board system, or listserv? Internet relay chat. In information theory, what is the term for the unpredictability of information content? Bandwidth, entropy, or latency? Entropy. Which philosophical approach argues that scientific theories should be evaluated based on their ability to make successful predictions? Logical positivism, instrumentalism, or critical realism? Instrumentalism. What was the first commercially available vector-based drawing program for personal computers? Adobe Illustrator, MacDraw, or Corel Draw? Corel Draw. Which cognitive bias describes the tendency to judge the frequency of events by how easily examples come to mind? Availability heuristic, conjunction fallacy, or base rate fallacy? Availability heuristic. In which decade did the first commercially successful solid-state disk drive appear? The 70s, 80s, or 90s? The 1990s. What architectural principle describes the relationship between the size, proportion, and harmony of different elements? Tensegrity, tectonics, or golden ratio? Golden ratio. Which early encryption system was based on substituting each letter in a message with another letter a fixed number of positions away in the alphabet? Beguinier cipher, Caesar cipher, or Playfair cipher? Caesar cipher. In neuroscience, what is the term for the process by which neural connections are strengthened through repeated use? Neuroplasticity, long-term potentiation, or myelination? Long-term potentiation. Which early computer memory technology stored data as acoustic waves in tubes filled with mercury? Magnetic core memory, delay line memory, or Williams tube? Delay line memory. What philosophical concept describes a thought experiment about a Chinese room operator who appears to understand Chinese but merely follows a set of rules? Turing test, Chinese room argument, or mind-body problem? Chinese room argument. Which early computer graphics technique involves representing 3D objects as a collection of flat polygons? Ray tracing, wireframe modeling, or voxel rendering? Wireframe modeling. In psychology, what is the term for the tendency to assume others have more insight into one's mental state than they actually do? Spotlight effect, illusion of transparency, or fundamental attribution error? Illusion of transparency. Which early digital audio format introduced in the 1990s used psychoacoustic principles to achieve compression? Wave, MP3, or FLAC? MP3. What is the term for the economic concept where increasing one person's utility necessarily decreases another? Zero-sum game, Nash equilibrium, or Pareto efficiency? Zero-sum game. In linguistics, what is the term for words derived from proper names? Patronymics, eponyms, or demonyms? Eponyms. Which early computer animation technique involved photographing physical models in slightly different positions to create the illusion of movement? Rotoscoping, stop motion, or cell animation? Stop motion. What cognitive bias describes the tendency to place too much importance on personality-based explanations for others' behavior? Actor-observer bias, fundamental attribution error, or self-serving bias? Fundamental attribution error. In mathematics, what is the name for a collection of sets that contains all possible combinations of its basic sets? Power set, union set, or Cartesian product? Power set. Which early computer networking protocol was designed specifically for transferring files between computers? HTTP, FTP, or SMTP? FTP. In typography, what is the term for the adjustment of space between specific pairs of characters? Tracking, kerning, or leading? Kerning. Which philosophical concept suggests that an action is morally right if it leads to the most happiness or well-being for the greatest number of people? Deontology, utilitarianism, or virtue ethics? Utilitarianism. In architecture, what term describes the structural element that transfers the weight of a building outward and downward? Buttress, cantilever, or truss? Buttress. Which early video compression technology developed in the 1980s became a standard for video conferencing? MPEG, H.261, or AVI? H.261. What cognitive bias describes the tendency to overestimate the likelihood of events with greater availability in memory? Representativeness heuristic, availability cascade, or clustering illusion? Availability cascade. In information retrieval, what is the term for the ratio of relevant documents retrieved to the total number of existing relevant documents? Precision, recall, or F measure? Recall. Which early color television system was developed by CBS but ultimately rejected in favor of a competing system? NTSC, Field Sequential Color System, or PAL? Field Sequential Color System. In behavioral economics, what is the term for the bias where people place higher value on things they own compared to identical items they don't own? Endowment effect, sunk cost fallacy, or status quo bias? Endowment effects. Which architectural style is characterized by the use of industrial materials and exposed structural elements? Art Nouveau, high-tech architecture, or postmodernism? High-tech architecture. In mathematics, what is a term for a number that can be expressed as the ratio of two integers where the denominator is not zero? A rational number, or transcendental number? Rational number. Which early computer input device used a light-sensitive pen to detect positions on screen? Light pen, joystick, or trackball? Light pen. What psychological principle suggests that the whole is perceived as different from the sum of its parts? Gestalt principle, Weber-Fechner law, or signal detection theory? Gestalt principle. In economics, what is the term for the situation where a product's value increases as more people use it? Economics of scale, network effect, or positive externality? Network effect. Which early computer memory technology stored data as patterns of magnetized dots? Bubble memory, drum memory, or core memory? Bubble memory. In philosophy of mind, what is a term for the view that mental states are identical to brain states? Dualism, identity theory, or functionalism? Identity theory. Which early digital photography format was developed by the Joint Photographic Experts Group? GIF, JPEG, or PNG? JPEG. In cognitive psychology, what is the term for the mental framework that organizes knowledge about a concept? Mental model, schema, or prototype? Schema. Which early music synthesizer introduced in the 1960s was the first to use voltage control? Moog synthesizer, Mellotron, or DX7? Moog synthesizer. In urban design, what is the term for an open public space typically surrounded by buildings or streets? Plaza, arcade, or agora? Plaza. Which cryptographic technique involves hiding a message within another message or medium? Encryption, steganography, or hashing? Steganography. Excuse me, that was steganography. In psychology, what is the term for the process by which people come to like things merely because they are familiar with them? Mere exposure effect, halo effect, or novelty bias? Mere exposure effects. Which early computer graphics technique simulates light rays traveling from the eye through pixels on a screen? Ray tracing, radiosity, or Z buffering? Ray tracing. In behavioral economics, what is the term for the tendency to prefer avoiding losses over acquiring equivalent gains? Risk aversion, loss aversion, or sunk cost fallacy? Loss aversion. Which early audio recording technique involved cutting grooves directly into a wax cylinder? Magnetic recording, phonograph recording, or wire recording? Phonograph recording. In information theory, what is the term for the amount of uncertainty reduced by receiving a message? Signal to noise ratio, information gain, or bandwidth? Information gain. Which early artificial intelligence approach focused on encoding expert knowledge as a set of rules? Neural networks, expert systems, or genetic algorithms? Expert systems. In architecture, what is a term for a projecting window structure that extends from an external wall? Dormer, bay window, or clerestory? A bay window. Which early video game released in 1980 featured a character navigating a maze while being pursued by ghosts? Space Invaders, Pac-Man, or Donkey Kong? Pac-Man. In psychology, what is the term for the way people explain the causes of events or behaviors? Attribution theory, cognitive dissonance, or self-perception theory? Attribution theory. Which early computer networking technology used coaxial cable in a ring topology? Ethernet, token ring, or FDDI? Token ring. In typography, what is a term for text that is aligned with both the left and right margins? Justified text, flush text, or block text? Justified text. Which economic theory suggests that government spending can stimulate economic growth during downturns? Supply side economics, Keynesian economics, or monetarism? Keynesian economics. In architecture, what is the term for a room or a hall serving as the main entrance to a building? Foyer, vestibule, or atrium? Vestibule. Which early computer memory technology stored data as tiny magnetic rings? Core memory, bubble memory, or drum memory? Core memory. In psychology, what is the term for the cognitive bias where people believe their own failures are due to external factors? Actor-observer bias, self-serving bias, or fundamental attribution error? Actor-observer bias. Which early digital communication protocol was specifically designed for sending electronic mail between computers? HTTP, SMTP, or FTP? SMTP. In design, what is the term for the technique of making objects appear three-dimensional by using highlight and shadow? Perspective, chiaroscuro, or skeuomorphism? Skeuomorphism. Which early computer operating system developed at Bell Labs in the 70s became the basis for many modern operating systems? CP/M, Unix, or MS-DOS? Unix. In cognitive psychology, what is the term for the automatic and unconscious process of filling in missing information? Perceptual closure, Gestalt principle, or cognitive scaffolding? Perceptual closure. Which early data visualization technique used punch cards to represent and analyze statistical information? Hollerith tabulating machine, Venn diagram, or pie chart? Hollerith tabulating machine. In linguistics, what is the term for a word that has the same spelling but different meanings and origins? Homograph, homonym, or homophone? Homograph. Which early computer display technology used a grid of tiny mirrors to project an image? LCD, DLP, or CRT? DLP. In psychology, what is the term for the tendency to interpret ambiguous stimuli as consistent with one's existing beliefs? Apophenia, pareidolia, or assimilation bias? Assimilation bias. Which early digital music format developed in the 1980s standardized how electronic instruments could communicate? MP3, MIDI, or WAV? MIDI. In economics, what is the term for the maximum amount a buyer is willing to pay for a good or service? Marginal utility, reservation price, or opportunity cost? Reservation price. Which early computer security technique involved using a physical object to gain authorized access? Password protection, token-based authentication, or biometric verification? Token-based authentication. In information theory, what is the term for the minimum number of bits needed to represent a piece of information? Kolmogorov complexity, Shannon entropy, or Huffman code? Kolmogorov complexity. And our last question. Which early artificial intelligence approach attempted to model the brain's neural structure? Expert systems, neural networks, or genetic algorithms? Neural networks. Thanks for playing, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye. In linguistics, what is the term for words derived from proper names? Patronymics, eponyms, or demonyms?